Welcome to Beyond the Surface. On our podcast, we highlight underrepresented voices in architecture. We'll humanize architects by uncovering who they are beyond the surface. Hi, I'm your host, Alex Sanchez, representing the Illinois Tech student chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects. Today's episode is called Outside Perspective with our guest, Julie Eizenberg. Julie is founding partner of the award-winning Santa Monica-based architecture firm, KoningEizenberg Architecture. Julie teaches and lectures around the world and has served on many boards, including Public Architecture and From Youth Inside Films. In 2020, Julie was honored as a design leader in Architecture Records Woman in Architecture Awards. Together with her partner, Hank Koning, Julie has been awarded the American Institute of Architects Los Angeles Chapter Gold Medal in 2012, Australian Institute of Architects Gold Medal in 2019, and American Academy of Arts and Letters Architecture Award in 2021. Thank you for being here with us and taking your time while you're in Chicago to do this podcast. How are you feeling today?
Pretty good.
So why don't we get started? So we'll first talk about your background. So can you tell us a little bit about how you grew up?
I grew up in Melbourne, Australia, where I think at the time 50% of the population had at least one parent born outside the country. So it's a sort of an immigrant culture with strong ethnic groups. I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish household, had a good family, 3 siblings, noisy house, a lot of arguing, the usual good stuff.
So when in your childhood did you become interested in architecture?
I didn't, not in my childhood. So my partner, Hank, I think he knew he was going to be an architect when he was 3. I had no idea what I was doing, and I was trying to work out what program to go to at university. And someone said, why don't you try architecture? Because you can do art stuff and you can do math stuff. I had a broad interest range, and they said, just go over there and talk to people and see what you find out. So I went there, and there was a husband and wife couple. They taught building construction, actually in structures. This will come back again later. They were already sort of working on early computers. So they were making us do our structures, for example. And we were doing those cards, punch cards. This is back in the day. You take your punch cards all the way to this other building, way across campus. It's huge room, air conditioning and machines, just to get your punch cards processed and work out whether your beam size was correct. So this is kind of an oddball, long ago period. But anyhow, I went up to him, and he was standing at the desk, and he was a grumpy kind of guy, but nice. And he said, well, it's a really good career. You get to do a lot of stuff. You don't really have to choose. It's just a good education. I thought, oh, okay. So it was his fault.
So architecture for you was more like just taking a risk, trying something new.
I've never been very good at thinking things out ahead, and I've fallen into most decisions. I'm not a planner that way.
Okay.
I've been lucky.
So when you started at the University of Melbourne, what did that feel for you, starting in architecture?
It was really scary, actually. I was completely out of my depth in terms of what we were doing. I didn't find it an easy fit. It was fascinating, but I found the tasks hard. And it didn't jive that easily with my home life, which was a much more conservative context. They didn't understand why you needed to stay late. It was all a little skitsy. So trying to reconcile home life and what was becoming my creative life was a difficult transition for them and for me.
So what did that transition feel like for you?
Stressful, and I think that's okay to be out of your depth.
New?
Everything was new. I'd never been exposed to so many new things in so short a time.
Mm-hmm.
What was wonderful about architecture school was that you were consistently with the same group of people. So I think there was 100 students in the first year. You were with those students in all subjects, and we were in the same building. You created a support group by accident, basically, the people that you became friendly with, who you sat across from at a desk, which is how I met Hank. So we met in architecture school first day. I sat on one side of the table, he sat on the other. Other good friends sat in the other place, and we stay in touch. But it's that support system that architecture offers as an education too that is pretty amazing. And that got me through it.
That's very interesting because I know many other careers don't really have as much of a support system. So
No.
just being like thrown in to a career where everything is so much different. Originally, I was going to study computer science.
Uh-huh.
So when I first joined architecture, I just wanted to be able to build things.
Yeah.
But I like that you talked about the community and the support around because architecture is not easy. And you do stay long hours. But what gets students through it is that support system because you really get to know your peers and make those different connections, especially like with you. You found your partner for the rest of your life.
Yeah. I was, again, pretty lucky. The other part of it is that my family didn't understand what I was doing. If it wasn't that there were other folks there doing the same thing and I saw them all the time, that would have made me feel that I was maybe in the wrong place. So again, it's that issue of having a group of people pursuing stuff together and being supportive of each other that makes you feel strong enough to take something out of your depth and do it.
Yeah, it makes it a lot more possible.
Yep.
Do you think trying to explain design to your family members helped you with communicating architecture?
I don't think I saw the opportunity to explain. They learned by watching what we did and the things that we made, right? But they never got very involved. And I think it's a little bit like being an immigrant. You're from a different culture. And you just have a different person in one culture than you are in the other one. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You have lots of hats. You're an insider and an outsider in a bunch of different places. And you just put on the hat that fits your behavior in whichever group of people you're with.
Yeah. And that's actually a good connection because you ended up coming to the U.S. with Hank as well and studying at UCLA for grad school. So what did that transition look like for you?
Well, the transition is odd because Australian speaks English just the same as the US speaks English, but they use different words for things. And in the architectural arena, it's the name of components. So you're talking about the base at the bottom of a wall. That's base here. It's skirting in Australia. So things that you thought were going to be the same aren't the same, right? It's like, oh, that's a whole different name. So you could have conversations with people and not know what they were talking about for quite a while when they're talking about things in construction. But in terms of coming to UCLA, the part that was different, which made it less scary than actually architecture school at 18, which is when I got there, was one, we had each other, and two, we had both worked a little bit. We understood the privilege of going back to school. Like everyone's in a hurry to get out undergraduate, right? As fast as you can. And then you work out, wait a minute, why was I in such a hurry? Because that was time I had to think. And so graduate school allowed that thinking time, and we just luxuriated in it. Like the more information we could get, the better.
Mm-hmm. So why did you end up going to grad school? What made you make that decision?
Okay, so Australia is a long way away. And the thing about Australians is they usually do, when they're college students anyway, they usually do that year abroad. And they often travel in packs. If you travel around Europe, you see it a lot, or in Asia. And they'll go for a long time. We had never done that year abroad. And architecture students, the tradition was to do it after third year, because you had to do a year of work experience. We didn't do it that way. We worked in Melbourne during that year. And so we get to the end of school and we say, we've got to go somewhere. We've got to do the trip. And so we'll go work somewhere. So we're looking for English-speaking countries because our language skills weren't great. But there was a world recession on, so we couldn't work out how to get jobs. We thought we could come and work here. At that time, you could work around a work permit. But we didn't understand that. We were very sort of young, naive, and thought, if they say no, they mean no, right? So we couldn't get a work permit that way. So then we thought, well, how else can we go abroad? And we worked out if we went to school, that was a way that we could structure an opportunity to be outside the country for a while. So why did you choose UCLA? I know it's coming as a question. So Hank had a thing, he didn't like cold weather. So either it had to be one of the one-year programs, and if it was a 2-year program, it had to be warmer weather.
Okay. And what did it look like to see the difference in architecture?
So California superficially is not completely unfamiliar. The part about Southern California that's different is socially. It was not in the 80s a place where you saw people on the street. So as an outsider, you just didn't know where to hang out. Australia and Melbourne, where we're from, is a coffee culture. There's a coffee shop on every corner. It had been since the 50s. The Italians' immigration had brought coffee in as a big deal into sort of social life. There was the pub system, which came from the English, I guess. There was a pub on every corner. Around the university in Melbourne, there was a pub every block, and you would go after school and hang out in the pubs and talk architecture. And frankly, probably I learned as much in the pub from other students talking about architecture as I did in the building.
How did it feel when you were starting to understand the social differences?
Well, so what happens at architecture school, especially grad school at that time, was most of the people were from somewhere else. So again, that's something we weren't used to in Australia, that families were from somewhere else. The Greek families, the Italian families, the Jewish families, the Dutch families, there was a lot of that. But you went to university in the same town that you grew up in. You didn't think about going to another state, let alone another country or anything like that. At UCLA, there was a great bond established between the students who came from overseas. So there was that support group. Now, I'm going somewhere with this. I know it sounds odd, but that group is a special kind of club that comes together for a small amount of time, for 3 or 4 years. And then one person goes home. Somebody else goes to take a job in another town. And you find, unless you make friends with the folks who actually are in the city, you're alone again. So there's a big difference between, I guess, university culture and daily culture. And so once we were able to work in the US, we started to meet people who lived in the US and weren't planning to be there for a couple of years just as part of their career path.
Yeah. So what was your early career like?
Okay, so we had come to LA, and for the first year we really hated it. It was this thing of never finding out where anybody was. Mm-hmm. And by the end of the second year, we were in the groove. We understood that this was a place where often people say people go to escape. And I think we had come for the freedom of not being dutiful children, right? And being able to screw up without anybody watching, right? So this is fun. Plus, we also see that there are problems to solve here. So it's thought, well, this would be an interesting place to practice. We were lucky enough to get a work permit. Well, it's lucky and unlucky. We couldn't get a work permit to work for others, but we could get a work permit to work for ourselves, partly to do with the way trade treaties work between countries. That was an option that was available to us. So we were doing this by the seat of our pants. Like, we have to find clients. What do you do? So we did have family help. That was great. Financially, I don't think we could have done it without that. So we start looking for work. So our career is, living room table. Then you move to the garage. And then eventually you get office space. But I think the core was, I think a lot of people call this agency, about creating opportunities that architects don't think they can create. We started volunteering in community organizations and made contacts in people who were doing revitalization of streets and communities, building affordable housing, and that kind of stuff. So that was the core of a client base. At the same time, we were doing small design build projects. So maybe that's another part of the sort of the Hank and Julie story. My father could screw in a light bulb. We didn't do any of that stuff. We had to get someone in to do it. Hank's family are contractors and concreters and carpenters and electricians. And so that blend of extreme practicality allowed us to sort of take the big ideas that we had and start to try and apply them in real life.
That was probably scary, wasn't it? Like, to go from being a student to being like the owner of a firm. Most architects, they go through working under someone. What did that feel like when you were like, okay, now I have to find clients and be in charge of projects?
Again, if I had been more thoughtful, maybe we would never have done it. We were 25 or 26. Why not? You just do it. We had no business plan. We had no idea if this was a long-term thing or a short-term thing. Just like jump in, see what happens. I recommend it. I know we've all been trained to be very cautious about financial risk. And I don't say this lightly because I know a lot of people, we had support. I had a safety net. Hank and I had a safety net if something happened. But sometimes thinking about it too hard doesn't do you any good.
Yeah. I think that it's pretty interesting because it's not something people are willing to risk. Because like you were saying, there is a lot of risks that go into it. Like it could have all failed, but I think when taking risks, you never know what's going to happen. That's what makes you more exciting.
It's a personality thing. Some people thrive on it, and some people don't.
Yeah. Do you think the fact that you were young, you had tried so many things, you tried architecture, you tried moving to California, of all the places. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But you tried so many things. Did it feel like just another big thing to try as well?
It didn't feel that risky. I think it's because we probably blocked it out. But I think we also probably had a false idea of what we could accomplish. It's like, why can't we?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes not knowing is as good as knowing.
That's true.
People really liked our accent. I didn't realize it would be a benefit, but it truly was starting out. We were exotic. There were not many Australians here. People would ask you all the stupid questions, like, have you seen a kangaroo? Do you have electricity? I mean, it was really weird. But we're talking 1979, 1980. It's changed a lot. Australians now run, I think, every new coffee house that is put up in the US. It's very, there's a lot of Australians in the restaurant business. They've made a very vibrant appearance in the arts. So people don't think of Australia the same way anymore. But back then, it was funny. And then you had to deal with the movies that came out about Crocodile Dundee and all of those, and the cliches. And it's like, oh. But it was funny. And Americans were very kind. It's like they felt a kinship. I'm not sure why, but it made them trust us in a way that I think was an advantage.
Mm-hmm. So why did you guys end up staying in California?
We did like the weather. And California was pretty exciting then. There was the architectural scene. We're talking about the emergence of Frank Gehry and Tom Main and all of those kind of guys. There was the real sense that it was a city that was ready to fill in. Because it couldn't, it still did, but it couldn't just spread out. And the idea of filling in and the vibrancy of all of the immigrant cultures made it feel very cosmopolitan and like there was problems to solve and things to do. Mm-hmm. So it was, I think, a time that was socially interesting and also creatively incredible. In the arts as well, David Hockney was working there. Ed Ruscha's career was moving up. All of these people who became giant celebrities in the art world were all coming out of California.
Mm-hmm. Whenever I think of like LA, I just always think of a giant melting pot of everything you can find. Well, I know it's different now than it was before. When it came to LA, whenever I would go as a kid, there was always a vibrant community. And I think the Mexican community especially, that's the one I grew up around. So anytime we went, there was always something to do there. And as I grow older, I think I can appreciate the different melting pots of cultures and the different areas around the city that there are to explore. Yeah. But you talked earlier about the differences in community from Australia and the US. Yeah. But you also talked about when you started your firm, you guys became more involved in the community.
We did. The movement to engage communities in the decisions that impacted their neighborhoods was starting to grow. So you'd had an era of, what would you call it, planning from above, and people realized that it was not working well. Chicago projects are a case in point. The smart people above said, this is the quick way to get the housing we need, and we'll do it. And they didn't ask people what they needed, and they didn't ask permission to take land and use it another way. None of that happened in the 60s and the 70s. By the end of the 70s, there was a movement to saying, well, you know what happens if we ask the community? Or we, instead of clearing everything, there was a term in Australia, we called it some clearance. Here they called it urban renewal, which basically meant you take swaths of space, get rid of whatever's there, and build some idealized new community. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. So we came in the 80s, and that was changing. And the people in local government were very interested in where that would go. So we were involved with people who were trying to put into practice ideas that had been written about in books and happened in isolated places and making them mainstream practice. And at this point in time, community engagement is absolutely mainstream practice. So we were lucky enough to be in on the ground. So we were working with communities. Everyone says it's just about listening. It's not just about listening. It's got to be more active than that, because doing as you're told never gets you anywhere, because you're only responding to what people are superficially saying. You've got to dig a little deeper. You've got to find out what it is. And sometimes you find that out by accident. You ask the question that just gets the answer. It's like, oh, so that's what they're talking about. Because often, I think, in a community engagement setting, people are saying what they think they're meant to be saying, and also, to a certain extent, and rightly so, are nervous about change.
Yeah, because change, well, historically,
It's not necessarily benefited them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So where is the balance between listening and innovation? Because innovation, you're like trying to make things new and trying to change things. So where did that balance come in?
It's about how to enter other people's stories, I think, so that they see that you're looking for the same thing they're looking for. Then what you propose as risk doesn't look as risky, because you're doing something that they get the idea of, and maybe it looks a little different. I mean, don't forget, we're judging architecture often really by what formally it is, not what it's socially doing. Mm-hmm. And so there's more than one way to achieve the same social goal. People are more interested, I think, in what they can do and how it feels to be there than they are in if you're using brick or tile, although they will express their views in brick or tile, because if you're in Chicago, brick is safe. They've seen it before. The other issue is you have to keep things a little open-ended, which isn't always what a community with ethnic roots wants. The trouble is, in America, communities have changed hands so many times. So today's Black community is tomorrow's Latino community. And, you know, before that, it was the Japanese community, and then it'll be the somebody else community again and later. And somehow you have to build in connections that allow people to be equals, but not claim only for themselves. There's some projects that have to be only for a group, but more often than not, we've been dealing with more general public, where there are multiple interests and multiple stories that overlap.
And I know, like, seeing like the work you do a lot with communities. So how do you approach it differently with projects that are not in the U.S.?
Projects not in the U.S. All right, so I think, well, it's what's the word? It's self-justifying. Well, I had always grown up as an outsider. So I was a Jewish kid and I went to Methodist school. I always knew what it was like to be outside of the system. From an early time, we ate funny food, we dressed differently, you know, we looked different. I had curly hair. Everyone in school had blonde, long hair. I mean, I know that kind of stuff. I think I developed a place for myself, and it goes along with this idea that I think an outsider is a creative position, because you can get outside of yourself and look at a situation. You can look at your relationship with others, you can look at them as others, as a group, and you start to see different things. So you group what you see in a different way. I'm not the only person who does that. Lots of people do it. I mean, the whole infusion of what we're seeing in the art scene is a good example of that, right? Because all of these different cultures have come in. They were born, somebody was born somewhere else, but they come here, they do stuff that people didn't expect to see. I've always had a thing of being able to sort of sense a sort of emotional intelligence in others and a sense of comfort. Maybe if you want to take it back to family, My dad went to the 8th grade, and then he was not a well-behaved child, and he told them he was going to private school, but he never went. And he was a bit of a non-conformer. Anyhow, so he was never very comfortable in institutional settings. Taking us to school, you could see that he was like, I don't want to have to talk to the teacher because the teacher's going to find out, that I'm not that educated. I mean, he's a smart guy, and he did very well. But it's like there was always this guard between institutional settings. If I went to a museum with him, which was very rare, that was another place he would you could tell this was not his comfort zone. If I went to the races with him, sure, horse races, he'd be happy. Or the football, that's fine. But anything that was an educated setting didn't put him at ease, or an educational, institutional setting. And I watched that behavior, and I thought, how do you make people feel more at ease? You start looking for strategies that help people feel comfortable. Whether he would agree with the strategies I use or not, I don't know. But it's an observation that I've always found that if it's not too slick an environment, not too fancy, more people find it comfortable than if it's a very fancy environment where it really restricts to a certain group of people who know how to behave in that area and you know what's expected of them. Mm-hmm. I've always thought if you want people to feel at ease, a space where you're allowed to make a mess is a really great visual to keep, because it means it's not that precious. I mean, if you walk in with a bunch of kids in a family group and, the kid runs off and starts rolling around on the floor, if you're in a very fancy place, you're worried that the carpet's going to get damaged or dirty or whatever it is. But if you're in a more informal place with more rugged materials, you're not worried about that as much. So these are silly little things, but they make a difference to the kind of behavior people feel they have to have, and you can put them more at ease.
So thinking about all the elements that build these experiences in a community, how do you approach affordable housing?
So affordable housing is very prescriptive to a certain extent in the US. There's not a lot of room for invention on the inside. The way housing is funded, the size of units and the organization of units is pretty controlled. You can, and we did, with a number of other architects in LA, innovate a lot in the form of that housing. So in the 80s, it was a decentralization of funding from the federal government and HUD, Housing and Urban Development, to not-for-profit neighborhood development companies. And they were just getting off the ground. And we got to work with some of these people, and they were fantastic. And they were saying, well, how can we make it so we can stabilize lives and make people feel better? So they wanted places that were thinking more about the quality of life they could give residents. The second part was that energy was expensive. I'm not good on my dates, but there was all that stuff with oil in the Carter era and sort of how expensive oil got. So people were starting to worry about energy and that there was not an unlimited source. This is before sustainability. We're basically talking about an energy frugality and an understanding even then that resources on the planet were limited. So it's beginning to morph into what would become the sustainability movement. So they were interested in how you could make the buildings more comfortable without using as much energy. So that led to cross-ventilation, all of the sort of known principles of how you would design, which were already employed, but it meant that we were doing single-loaded housing. So there was a walkway and housing units off, not a double-loaded corridor. So those kind of things were happening. So there's all of this kind of stuff started to change the look of the housing. So it was being designed at a smaller scale with how do you create opportunities for people to have informal social interaction and a strong interest in shade and energy performance of the building envelope. And that's how it got to look different. And truthfully, it looked better than the market rate housing, which was relying on air conditioners and applied ornament. And I think there was a sort of a switch that some of the things that were being done in affordable housing started to enter the market rate housing.
I also found the
Sustainability
aspect pretty interesting, how it wasn't much of a concept, but it needed to be sustainable design practices with like cross-ventilation. It also gave opportunity for people to be able to be closer to nature as well. And I think being closer to nature has been seen more as a privilege here.
So nature is a privilege because in urban situations, it's a very highly valued commodity, right? There's not enough of it. It's been hard at density to get planting included, and the sites often make it difficult. People have finally got more comfortable with putting landscape on structure, and that's made a big difference. In the affordable housing funding stream, there have been, over the years, increasing value given to energy, carbon footprint, wellness, and the run-on effects with natural materials and green space and stuff like that. So you score higher with your project for eligibility for the funding if you start to incorporate these elements. If you have a community room in your development and space for program for children and stuff like that, it changes the formula of your ability to get funding. So that started to be built in, and that is a good thing. Unfortunately, it costs more. There's just no doubt about it. But it will be more durable, and it will probably allow people's... It's subliminal. How you measure this exactly, I don't know. Hopefully, it helps people feel more secure when they've got a whole lot of other stuff up in the air because life is throwing them punches they didn't expect, right? I'm off topic, but you've had me thinking about it. When we go and visit affordable housing projects with folk, one of the questions that always comes up is sort of vacancy. And they say, well, we don't have a vacancy rate. We have a waiting list. And you say, well, do people stick around? And they say, yeah. Once people find the safety net of housing that they can afford, they don't want to leave. So if you do the right things in terms of the environmental cues and you have the right support programs and stuff, you are stabilizing lives and you're not investing foolishly, right? Because the attrition is low in terms of falling back out of the system.
Yeah, as a kid, I moved a lot. I've gone to maybe 12 schools in my lifetime.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I think one of the things you were talking about, it made me think about like the difference between affordable housing and apartments. Most apartments, I would say, are seen more as temporary. And I think when it comes to the US, there is a lot more of a moving culture since we have a lot of immigrants, a lot of migrants in general within the country. It's like some places are seen more as temporary until I settle down and buy a house, many people like to say. And so when you're talking about the designs that you're putting into affordable housing, I find them interesting because it makes it seem like that's where people are going to stay forever. It's bringing in a whole new typology that many cities are still adjusting to because, again, apartments aren't seen as something that is permanent versus like affordable housing. Usually they give everything that people need, like community spaces and green spaces, that it just makes it seem like, well, I couldn't spend the rest of my life here if I really wanted to.
There is a movement at the moment. It's the idea of missing middle housing that may not necessarily be for people in need, but because we're out of alignment with what costs are and what incomes are, we have to sort of work out how to make housing that maybe is smaller but has amenities that borrow from the park and whatever else you're trying to do that makes multifamily housing permanent housing in people's minds. Now, Chicago has a fairly healthy approach to multifamily housing. You know, it's not looked down on if you live in an apartment or whatever. I mean, what urban areas, and LA is beginning to be that way too, did used to be. But multi-unit living is no longer seen as inferior living. It's just that we don't have many good models to take forward. So in somewhere like California, that we're not building enough housing that actually has a little bit more open space in it that makes it easier to put down roots and keep roots, you know?
Yeah. So after talking about community and housing approaches, what is your design philosophy?
It starts with the social aspects. We've always sort of thought that. Sounds a little corny, but it's the way that we organize our thinking in the office. How do we make people feel welcome? How do we create opportunities for feeling part of a group as well as opportunities to be by yourself. Nobody much wanted to do it. It was a hole. It's part of the reason we ended up there. Like, no one else wanted to do it, so there's a place for a young architect to come in. But we didn't understand how people looked down on it. I think they didn't only look down on the housing, they looked down on the people who would live in the housing as if they were not the same people as them. And we never really understood the difference between people with money or people without money. So it was a philosophy that was about people without the layer of power and money associated. I'll work for someone with power, don't care. Someone with money, that's great. And I'll also work for someone who has nothing, because why not? They need a roof over their head. The problem's a little different, the space is a little smaller. But if you start applying principles of kindness, it sounds corny, I know, architects aren't meant to talk about kindness, across everyone, then you can't go wrong, can you?
No. I think what is pretty cool is, especially since you have seen so much, you pay attention to so much details and how people are reacting, and you've done community work and actually connected with the users of these buildings that you're designing. When you talk about kindness, you're talking about creating that connection between people. How do you make a community that doesn't care so much about money, that doesn't...
I'm not here as a moral judge. That's another thing I'm really careful about. People working with, again, that's why I'm trying to get this idea that people are people, and there is no moral high ground because you work with one group more than you work with another. You just have to be respectful of people no matter who they are, and realize that even if you don't see it, that it's worth to spend the time to do something that has some inherent beauty or an unexpected sense of craft or something. It's worth it. It's worth to spend the time no matter what the ability of the viewer or the visitor to whatever you're making, or the resident, whatever their means are. Everyone's important.
And that goes back to the kindness, because I think, it depends on the different projects. Sometimes not all users always feel like they are worth it. So I think that's really nice.
Yeah.
So we also know you teach a lot.
Yeah.
You are also my professor.
And I think I'll be known for setting wicked problems that no one can solve.
But can you talk about how long you've been teaching and why you teach?
Oh, it's another thing I fell into. So I was at UCLA, and not everybody learns at the same speed. And so at UCLA, they recognized that some students were not learning fast enough. So instead of saying that they didn't have the capacity or that they were lazy, which are the usual things you try and say to excuse an institution, they said, you know what, we'll give these guys a second chance. And so they did these studios over the summer, and for 2 years I think I taught those studios with more senior staff than me. And then I sort of fell into teaching and ended up in the first year studio for, 5-10 years, I think, teaching, and then moved up into the kind of projects. And then I quit being a full-time kind of teacher, well, half-time, full-time, and sort of did itinerant gigs. And that's how I ended up at IIT. So for the last 20 years, I go every other year or two to some university that has a visiting program. And what's wonderful about them is they say, think of a project you'd like to look at. It doesn't have to be something necessarily that you do all the time. It's not about you being the expert, and investigate it. So I've done lots of different things that way, and the design of this park was another one of those opportunities to investigate with you stuff that I don't know myself.
I think that goes back to what you were saying about when you first joined grad school, being able to understand what it is to be creative.
Yeah.
You're still doing that. Even though you're a teacher now, you're constantly getting these spaces where you can be creative or just try to experiment with architecture.
Yeah, you have to keep doing that. If you get complacent, you get stupid.
So what advice would you give to young designers who are entering architecture right now?
It's interesting you asked me that question, because I'm on a panel and they're talking about the generational difference. And every generation disses the next, and then the younger one disses the older one. But apart from that, there's this issue of work-life balance, for example. This generation is much more interested in a work-life balance than previous generations. It's increasing. And a lot of it is for good reason, because there was exploitation and it really wasn't very fair. However, in the creative disciplines like we get to be in, like architecture, it's also a privilege to choose things when you can and say, wow, I want to learn about this. I'm really interested in this, so I want to do it, right? So I don't know how you turn that off at 5 o'clock. So this issue of work-life balance is not a concept that I really like. I think you need a break from anything you do. I'm not arguing about that. I think you need to be paid fairly. And I think all of that is part of it. But my advice is not to lose sight of the joy of being able to investigate a problem or investigate a creative solution to something you see that's worth putting your energy into.
That's true. Because I feel like when you're doing something you are passionate about, it doesn't always feel like work. So if you're going to be a designer, be passionate about it and understand.
Yeah, so it's not gonna be a huge job.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you're being asked to do repetitive stuff without creative or intellectual input. I mean, this is something about our profession, is that for all of our working lives, if we choose well in the kind of jobs that we have, whether you're in leadership or not in leadership, doesn't matter, you're still being challenged to creatively address issues that are in constant change, whether it be the representation system, the materials, the assemblies, the economics of practice. All of these things require continued attention and thinking and rethinking. Don't burn out and take it as a rote task.
Yeah, but I like it's like rethinking what work-life balance means.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's life balance.
Yeah. So we are on to our last question, but I do.
Okay, what is this? What's your favorite food?
What are your plans for the future?
Oh.
I know you're not a planner, but
I don't know. I actually don't know. And I don't care that I don't know. It doesn't worry me. At this point, I'm financially secure. I have a lovely family. I have grandchildren. I'm not sure what the next thing is. It will happen, you know, and then I'll know afterwards, and then I'll come back and I'll be able to tell you what it was.
okay. It's okay. I mean, a future that's open-ended.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I'm looking for a future that's open-ended.
Yeah, there's a lot of things you could be excited for. I think you like to live with the energy to create something new, whether it's with architecture or just something in your life. I think that's very inspiring. And
Oh, good.
it is. But yes, thank you for this conversation.
Pleasure. It was nice. It was nice working with you both too.
Thank you.
I want to thank everyone who's listening. We release our episodes monthly. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform. You can also follow us on Instagram at beyondthesurface_Nomas IIT. I want to thank our producer, Kayla Kwok, and the Nomas IIT team for making this podcast possible.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond the Surface featuring Julie Eizenberg. Until next time, goodbye.